The suffocating air of the naval base hangs heavy. Can you feel that tension building as a young woman in crisp new fatigues steps into a room full of battle-hardened SEALs? Their eyes sweep over her, dismissive smirks spreading across those weathered faces. A voice cuts through the silence. A rookie leading us? That's a joke. She stays silent, but her gloved hands clench tight, fighting desperately to keep her heart from trembling. Have you ever witnessed the heart-wrenching moment when an entire unit bets their lives on someone they didn't trust at all? Meet Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez, just 22 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and eyes that still hold traces of youth but burn with such quiet determination it's inspiring. Isn't it? In a world where respect is earned through years of blood, sweat, and proven combat experience, she was an anomaly, too young, too untested, too different. Emma came from ordinary people. Her father a dedicated park ranger, her mother a caring school teacher. No military dynasties here, no family traditions of service stretching back generations. How isolating that must have felt. While her SEAL teammates had grown up hearing gripping war stories around dinner tables, Emma had learned about nature, patience, and the art of reading terrain from a man who spent his life protecting national forests. Imagine the contrast. She'd been selected for the experimental leadership program, not because of her physical prowess, though she'd passed every grueling fitness test, but because of something the Pentagon psychologist called spatial intelligence. Wow, what a unique gift. Emma could look at a topographical map and see the story it told, where water would flow during storms, which ridges would provide cover, how valleys would channel sound and movement. It's like the land whispered secrets to her. It was a skill that had impressed her instructors at the Naval Academy. But here, among men who'd earned their knowledge through intense firefights and heart-pounding close calls, it felt like bringing a textbook to a gunfight. The humiliation started on day one, and it stung deeply. During the morning fitness run, Emma fell behind the pack, not dramatically, but enough for the veterans to notice and file away as evidence of her inadequacy. Can you picture their judgmental glances? Sergeant First Class Morrison, a 12-year veteran with 3 combat deployments under his belt, had even jogged backwards just to make sure everyone could hear him. She can't even keep up. Imagine her calling shots in combat when we're all depending on her speed. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it was dismissive, the kind that says, "You're not worth getting angry about." That hurt worse than open hostility would have. The pain of being invisible. During tactical briefings, Emma was assigned to observe and document military speak for "sit quietly and don't interfere." How frustrating. When she tried to ask questions about terrain features or suggest alternative routes, the responses were polite but patronizing. "That's an interesting academic perspective, Lieutenant," Chief Petty Officer Davis would say, his tone making it clear that academic perspectives weren't worth much in the real world. Talk about a subtle gut punch. The mess hall was the worst, absolutely soul-crushing. Emma would enter with her tray, scanning the room for an empty seat, knowing that every table of SEALs would somehow be full when she approached. She'd end up eating alone, surrounded by the buzz of conversation that stopped whenever she walked by. Can you feel that awkward silence? They weren't trying to be cruel. They just saw her as temporary, a bureaucratic experiment that would fail soon enough. But it cut deep. At night, in her quarters, Emma would spread out maps and satellite photos, studying them by lamplight long after lights out. Her dedication was unwavering. She memorized elevation changes, water sources, choke points, and escape routes for every possible operational area. Her roommate, another officer candidate, often found her asleep at her desk, face pressed against topographical surveys, highlighter still in her hand. Exhaustion never stopped her. "Why do you do this to yourself?" her roommate asked one morning. "They've already made up their minds about you." Emma had looked up from a map of Southeast Asian jungle terrain, her eyes red from exhaustion, but still focus such resilience. Because when the moment comes, and it will come, I'll be ready. And maybe, just maybe, that preparation will be the difference between bringing everyone home or losing someone who matters. How could I not push through? She kept a small photo tucked into her map case. Her father standing next to a trail marker in Yellowstone, pointing toward a mountain peak barely visible through morning mist. On the back, in his careful handwriting, "The path isn't always clear, sweetheart, but if you know how to read the signs, you'll never be truly lost." Those words were her anchor. Emma clung to those words during the long, humiliating days when she felt like an outsider pretending to belong. Oh, the loneliness. She didn't speak up in meetings, didn't challenge the dismissive comments, didn't defend herself against the subtle ways they made it clear she wasn't one of them. Instead, she waited and studied and prepared for the moment when academic knowledge would collide with real-world necessity. Could that turning point really come? And she could prove that sometimes the most important battles are won not by the strongest or the loudest, but by those who understand the ground they're fighting on. Profound, right? The mission briefing took place at 0300 hours in a secure room that smelled of coffee and tension. Nerves were on edge. Operation Nightfall, a high-priority hostage rescue deep in the jungles of Southeast Asia. High stakes indeed. An American aid worker had been captured by insurgents and taken to a remote compound that intelligence suggested was heavily fortified and strategically positioned in terrain that would make extraction extremely difficult. Oh no, what a nightmare. Team leader, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane, stood before the assembled SEALs, his weathered face grim, as he outlined the operational parameters, tension mounting. Gentlemen, will be inserting via halo jump at 0200 hours, approximately 15 clicks north of the target. Dense jungle, monsoon season, limited satellite coverage due to cloud cover, challenging conditions. Emma sat in the back of the room, notebook open, dutifully recording details that everyone else was committing to memory through years of experience, feeling out of place yet again. She noticed something the others might have missed. The topographical map showed the target area was in a valley system that would be particularly treacherous during the current weather pattern. Uh-oh. But she stayed silent, knowing her input wasn't welcome. How hard to bite her tongue. The mission went wrong almost immediately. Their GPS navigation system failed 12 hours into the insertion disaster. Not uncommon in that region where atmospheric conditions and electronic countermeasures could scramble sophisticated equipment, but still, what timing? What made it worse was that Chief Kane, their most experienced navigator, had taken shrapnel from an improvised explosive device during their first contact with enemy forces. Heart-stopping. Kane was still conscious, still giving orders, but blood loss was making him disoriented, poor guy. The team's secondary navigation specialist, Petty Officer Harrison, admitted what everyone was thinking. "Chief, I can't get a fix on our position. The landmarks don't match what we're seeing on the ground." They were lost in hostile territory with a wounded team leader and a mission clock that was already running behind schedule. Panic rising. Emma watched the confusion spread through the team, these elite operators who'd never faced a situation. Their training hadn't prepared them for unbelievable. She could see the doubt creeping into their movements, the way their heads turned toward each other, seeking guidance that no one could provide. That's when she quietly pulled out her own map, her moment. Not the digital overlay they'd been relying on, but a hand-drawn topographical survey she'd created during 3 sleepless nights of studying satellite imagery and historical survey data, her secret weapon. While the others had been dismissing her academic approach, Emma had been preparing for exactly this scenario. "Chief," she said softly, moving toward Kane's position, nerves of steel. "I think I know where we are." The response was immediate and predictable. Sergeant Morrison shook his head. "Lieutenant, with respect, this isn't the time for guesswork. You leading SEALs? Ridiculous," muttered another team member, though quietly enough to maintain plausible deniability. "But Chief Kane, eh? Blood loss making him more practical than proud. gestured for her to continue. Let's hear it, Rodriguez. We've got nothing else right now. Emma spread her hand-drawn map on the ground, pointing to terrain features around them. Based on the elevation changes we've experienced and the sound of water to our east, I believe we're here approximately 2 clicks south of where we think we are. She traced a route with her finger, confident now. There's a dry stream bed that runs northeast. If we follow it for approximately 40 minutes, it should bring us to high ground where we can establish visual contact with the target area. The team exchanged glances. Morrison crossed his arms. That's a lot of assumptions, Lieutenant. It's not assumptions, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the weight of a dozen skeptical stares standing tall. I've studied every topographical survey of this region going back 15 years. The stream bed shows up on satellite imagery from the dry season. It's our best option for covered movement toward the objective. Petty Officer Davis, the team's demolitions expert, looked at Kine questioningly. The chief was pale, clearly struggling to maintain focus, but his tactical mind was still functioning, holding on. We're behind schedule and off course. We need to make a decision. Kane looked at Emma's map, then at his team, then back at the young lieutenant who'd been dismissed as a bureaucratic experiment. Rodriguez, if you're wrong about this, then I'm responsible for the consequences, Chief. But if we stay here, we fail the mission entirely. The silence stretched for 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes, edge-of-your-seat tension. Finally, Kine nodded. We follow Rodriguez's route, but if this goes sideways, the responsibility is mine, not hers. As they moved out, Emma could feel the weight of their doubt pressing against her shoulders like a physical force. Every step was a test. Could she prove them wrong? Every terrain feature they encountered was measured against her predictions. When the stream bed appeared exactly where she'd said it would be, she saw Morrison's eyebrows rise slightly, surprised. When the covered approach worked perfectly, allowing them to advance undetected, she noticed Davis give her a grudging nod, respect budding. 43 minutes later, they reached the observation point. Emma had identified victory. Through their scopes, they could see the target compound spread out below them, exactly where her calculations had predicted it would be spot on. Chief Kane looked at Emma with something approaching respect. That was solid navigation, Lieutenant, a textbook example of terrain analysis. But Emma knew this was just the beginning. Oh, the real challenge awaited. Getting to the target was one thing. Completing the mission and bringing everyone home alive, that would be the real test of whether a rookie could truly lead SEAL's high drama. The hostage rescue had gone perfectly for exactly 18 minutes. They neutralized the perimeter guards, breached the compound, and extracted the aid worker without raising any alarms. Smooth sailing so far. But as they began their exfiltration, the jungle exploded into chaos. Boom! Enemy forces had been tracking them, not through electronic surveillance, but through old-fashioned fieldcraft and local knowledge. Clever foes. The insurgents knew these mountains better than any satellite imagery could reveal, and they'd positioned themselves perfectly to cut off every obvious escape route trapped. Now, 12 elite SEALs and 1 rescued civilian were pinned down in a rocky outcrop, surrounded by an enemy force that seemed to know exactly where they were and where they were going. Terrifying. Chief Kane was unconscious from blood loss, and his second-in-command, Sergeant Morrison, was making decisions based on conventional tactics that were proving inadequate for the terrain they faced. Mistake brewing. We've got movement on 3 sides, reported Petty Officer Davis through his scope. At least 20 hostiles, probably more. They're funneling us toward that narrow path to the north. It's a kill zone. Morrison studied their tactical map, his jaw tight with frustration. Standard doctrine says we fight our way through the weakest point in their line. Davis, prep demo charges. Will blast through their eastern flank and extract via the original route. Emma watched the situation developing with growing alarm. Oh no, this won't work. Morrison was thinking like a SEAL. Aggressive, direct, overwhelming force applied at the enemy's weakest point. but he wasn't thinking like someone who understood how this particular terrain would channel their movement and turn their strengths against them. Big oversight. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I think there might be another option." Morrison didn't look up from his map. "Lieutenant, this is a combat situation. Please maintain position and let us handle tactical decisions." "With respect, Sergeant, the eastern route will take us directly into an ambush. Look at the elevation lines." "Rodriguez," I said, "maintain position." But the situation was deteriorating rapidly, time running out. Enemy fire was increasing in intensity, bullets whizzing closer and closer, and their ammunition wouldn't last indefinitely. How long could they hold out? Emma could see the pattern developing, a chilling realization hitting her. The insurgents weren't just trying to kill them outright. They were herding them toward predetermined killing zones, where superior numbers and prepared positions would make escape impossible. Oh, the clever trap. That's when she saw it, her eureka moment, a feature on the terrain that wouldn't show up on any standard military map, but which her hours of studying geological surveys had burned into her memory like a lifeline. A limestone cave system that ran beneath the ridgeline, with an entrance hidden behind a waterfall, approximately 200 meters to their west. Could this be their salvation? "Sergeant Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd never used before, commanding and unyielding. "We need to move west, not east." "God damn it, Rodriguez, look at me!" The steel in her voice stopped Morrison mid-sentence, freezing him in place. "Those caves run under the enemy positions. I studied the geological surveys. There's a passage that comes out 3 clicks north of here, behind their lines. Trust me on this." Morrison stared at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and desperate calculation. Could he really consider this? "You want us to go underground in enemy territory based on geological surveys?" "I want us to go home alive," Emma replied firmly, "and this is how we do it." The gunfire intensified, crackling louder, and Davis called out urgently, "SSG, we need a decision. They're massing for a final push now." Morrison looked at his men, then at the unconscious Chief Kane, then back at Emma, his eyes searching for certainty. She could see the moment when tactical necessity overcame pride and prejudice, a pivotal shift. "If you're wrong about this, then we die down there instead of up here. But if I'm right, we all go home." Morrison nodded grimly. "Rodriguez, you have tactical command. Get us out of here, go!" The words hit Emma like a physical shock. Bam! For a moment, she felt the weight of 8 lives pressing down on her shoulders like an unbearable burden. These hardened warriors who'd spent months dismissing her capabilities were now trusting her with their survival. Unbelievable. Yet here it was. "Davis, Harrison covering fire on the eastern position. Make them think we're preparing to assault, deceive them. Morrison, get 3 men ready to move on my signal. We're going to that waterfall in 2-man rushes. Full suppression between movements, execute precisely." Emma's voice carried across the rocky position with calm authority that surprised even her. Where did this come from? She was no longer the uncertain rookie seeking approval. She was a tactical commander making life or death decisions with the clarity that comes from absolute preparation, meeting desperate necessity, empowering. The movement to the cave entrance was a masterpiece of small unit tactics, flawless execution. Emma coordinated covering fire, movement timing, and casualty evacuation with the precision of someone who'd studied every possible scenario in her mind. When they reached the waterfall, the cave entrance was exactly where she'd predicted, a narrow opening that would be invisible to anyone who hadn't spent dozens of hours analyzing topographical data. Perfect. "Single file. Maintain noise discipline," Emma ordered as they entered the limestone passages, whispers only. "Davis, you're our rear guard, watch our backs. Harrison, stay with the chief, keep him stable." The cave system was a maze of passages carved by centuries of water flow, dark and twisting. But Emma navigated it with the confidence of someone reading a familiar map, her mental blueprint guiding them. She'd memorized the underground topography so thoroughly that she could visualize their route, even in complete darkness. Amazing recall. 40 minutes later, they emerged from a concealed exit 3 kilometers behind enemy lines, with clear passage to their extraction point freedom at last. As they called for helicopter pickup, Morrison approached Emma with an expression she'd never seen directed at her before: genuine admiration. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "that was the most professional piece of tactical command I've witnessed in 12 years of special operations. Damn impressive." Around them, the other SEALs were checking equipment and establishing a security perimeter. But Emma could feel the shift in how they moved around her, not avoiding her presence, but unconsciously deferring to her judgment in small ways that spoke louder than any formal recognition. Heartwarming. If you were one of those SEALs in that situation, how many points would you give the rookie from 1 to 10? Think about it. She'd brought them home, all of them, every single one. And in doing so, she'd proven that sometimes the most important leadership quality isn't the ability to shout orders. It's the wisdom to know which path leads safely through the darkness. Profound truth. When the team reached the temporary safe zone, adrenaline still coursing through their veins like wildfire, Petty Officer Davis finally asked the question that had been building since the cave navigation. "Rodriguez, where the hell did you learn all that? Seriously?" Emma was checking Chief Kaney's vitals, her hands steady despite the emotional whirlwind of the past few hours, composure under pressure. The question hung in the air like smoke from a spent shell casing, thick and lingering, and she could feel every member of the team waiting for her answer, curiosity peaking. She sat back on her heels, looking out toward the jungle canopy where their helicopter would arrive in 20 minutes. 12 years as a Girl Scout," she said simply. "Every summer, every weekend, every chance I got to be in the wilderness building those foundations." The SEALs exchanged glances, surprised looks all around. Morrison frowned. "Girl Scouts don't teach cave navigation and tactical terrain analysis, do they?" "No," Emma agreed with a small smile. "But they teach you how to read the land, how to find your way when you're lost, how to keep a team together when everything goes wrong, essential skills." She paused, her voice taking on a quieter tone, reflective. "And my father, he taught me the rest, my greatest mentor." She reached into her map case and pulled out the photographs she'd carried through every training exercise, every humiliating meal in the mess hall, every night when she'd questioned whether she belonged here. The image showed a man in ranger uniform standing beside a trail marker, strong and wise. Mountains rising behind him like ancient guardians, majestic. Ranger James Rodriguez, Park Service. He spent 30 years protecting wilderness areas, leading search and rescue operations, mapping terrain that most people never see as passion. Emma's voice carried a mixture of pride and grief, bittersweet. He died in Afghanistan, attached to a Marine unit as a terrain specialist, tragic. Stepped on an IED while leading them through a mountain pass he'd mapped from satellite imagery, gone too soon. The silence that followed was different from the dismissive quiet she'd grown accustomed to. This was the respectful silence that warriors give to fallen comrades, even ones they'd never met. Honor in the air. He left behind boxes of military survey maps, geological studies, topographical analyses of every major conflict zone of the past 20 years, his legacy. I grew up studying them, learning to see terrain the way he did, not just as obstacles to overcome, but as puzzles to solve. Fascinating. Emma carefully returned the photograph to its place tenderly. "When I was 8, he'd quiz me on elevation changes. When I was 12, he'd have me plot routes through national parks using only compass and contour lines. Those lessons stuck." Harrison, the team's communications specialist, shook his head slowly, impressed. "That's why you knew about the caves. You'd studied the geological surveys." "I'd studied everything," Emma confirmed. "Soil composition, water tables, seasonal flooding patterns, mineral deposits that create cave systems thoroughly. My father always said that amateurs study tactics, but professionals study logistics and terrain-wise words." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation, deep thought. Finally, he spoke. Your father would be proud, Lieutenant, truly. What you did today, that wasn't just good navigation. That was professional-level tactical command under impossible circumstances. Outstanding. Emma felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, emotions surging. She'd imagined this moment of acceptance countless times, but she'd never expected it to come wrapped in grief for a father who would never see her prove herself. Poignant. Chief Kane stirred, consciousness returning gradually, waking up. His voice was weak, but alert. Status report. Mission successful, Chief, Morrison replied. All personnel accounted for. Hostage recovered. 0 friendly casualties. Lieutenant Rodriguez led us through a cave system to avoid enemy contact during exfil. Kane's eyes found Emma, studying her with the calculating gaze of a veteran leader, reassessing a previous judgment reappraisal. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. That kind of terrain knowledge, that's the difference between missions that succeed and missions that become memorials. Crucial. As the distant sound of helicopter rotors reached them, thump thump approaching, Emma realized that something fundamental had shifted. Profound change. She was no longer the outsider being grudgingly tolerated. She was a proven member of a team that had tested her under the most extreme circumstances possible and found her worthy of their trust, earned it. The validation she'd been seeking wasn't coming in the form of loud praise or formal recognition. It was arriving quietly in the way Davis checked with her before selecting the landing zone coordinates. Subtle respect, in the way Morrison positioned himself to cover her sector without being asked, in the way Kane looked at her when he spoke about mission success, true belonging. She belonged here finally, undeniably. She belonged, yes. The helicopter ride back to base was quieter than most post-mission flights. Reflective hush. Chief Kane slept under medical supervision, his vital signs stable, but requiring continued monitoring. Resting hero. The rest of the team sat in the familiar silence that follows successful operations, decompressing. Each man processing what they'd experienced, what they'd learned, and how close they'd come to a very different outcome. Hair-raising. Emma stared out the aircraft window at the jungle canopy passing below, still feeling the weight of command decisions that had determined whether 8 families would receive heroes' welcomes or folded flags. Immense responsibility. The magnitude of what had happened was beginning to settle into her consciousness, overwhelming. She led Navy SEALs through a combat situation and brought everyone home. Alive, incredible. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself that no amount of external validation could provide: inner strength. She belonged in this world, not because someone had decided to give her a chance, but because she'd earned her place through preparation, competence, and the kind of steady courage that emerges only when everything is at stake. Triumph. When they landed at the forward operating base, Emma expected the usual post-mission routine: medical checks, equipment inventory, preliminary debriefing, routine stuff. What she didn't expect was the crowd that had gathered on the landing zone. Surprise! Word had spread through the base communications network that an impossible mission had succeeded against all odds. Buzzing. But there were no ceremonies, no formal recognition, no speeches about breaking barriers or proving points, none of that fanfare. The SEALs didn't work that way. Their world was understated. Their respect was earned quietly and expressed even more quietly in the small gestures that meant everything to those who understood their significance. Meaningful. As Emma walked across the landing zone toward the debriefing room, something extraordinary happened. Magical. One by one, SEALs from other teams stopped what they were doing and nodded to her as she passed, not the polite acknowledgement given to officers because of their rank, but the recognition that flows between warriors who've proven themselves under fire. Peer respect. Sergeant Martinez from Echo Team, a 15-year veteran who'd never spoken to her before, stepped into her path and extended his hand-warm gesture. "Heard what you did out there, Lieutenant. That was solid work. Respect." Petty Officer Williams from Bravo Team simply nodded and said, "Welcome to the teams, ma'am. Inclusion." But the most meaningful moment came in the mess hall 3 hours later. Touching. Emma entered with her dinner tray, expecting to find her usual empty table in the corner lonely spot. Instead, she found Morrison and Davis sitting at a table near the center of the room, with an empty chair clearly reserved for her invitation. "Rodriguez," Morrison called out, loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "You eating alone or you want to sit with some SEALs?" The invitation was casual, delivered with the kind of gruff humor that characterized military friendships, light-hearted. But Emma understood its significance. She was being publicly accepted into the brotherhood, acknowledged as someone who'd earned her place through actions rather than politics or programs. Milestone. As she sat down, the conversation didn't focus on her gender, her age, or her status as an experimental addition to the teams. No superficial stuff. Instead, they talked about the mission itself, technical details of the cave navigation, alternative routes they might have taken, lessons learned for future operations, professional chat. She was being treated not as a symbol or an exception, but as a professional among professionals. Equality. Later that evening, Emma sat in her quarters writing her after-action report, documenting it all. The official document would note that the mission had been completed successfully with no friendly casualties, that terrain analysis had been crucial to mission success, and that all team members had performed their duties with exceptional skill under combat conditions. Factual. What it wouldn't capture was the transformation that had occurred not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. Personal growth. She'd stopped being the rookie trying to prove she belonged and become the professional who simply did belong. Confident now. Her father's photograph sat on the desk beside her report, cherished memento. And for the first time since his death, Emma felt truly connected to his legacy. Deep bond. He'd taught her to read the land, to find paths through impossible terrain, to lead people safely through dangerous places. His gifts. Tonight, she'd done exactly that, honoring him. There would be other missions, other challenges, other moments when her competence would be tested, inevitable. But something fundamental had changed during those hours in the jungle caves. Irreversible. She discovered that respect isn't granted, it's earned, one good decision at a time, one team brought safely home, hard won. And sometimes the greatest recognition comes not from medals or ceremonies, but from the quiet nod of professionals who've seen your work and found it worthy of their trust. Priceless. The path hadn't always been clear, but she learned to read the signs, mastered it. And now, finally, she was no longer lost, found. Comment. Silent leadership. If you believe the most powerful leadership comes through actions, not words, and that sometimes the people others doubt the most are exactly who you need when everything is on the line. Spot on. Subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people who prove that courage isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the most prepared when lives depend on your decisions. Absolutely.